Sources tell ABC News President Trump could soon sign an executive order directing the Secretary of Education to dismantle the Department of Education. Now, Congress would need to pass the necessary legislation in order to shut the DOE. So would you support that?
Well, listen, the policy of shutting down the Federal Department of Education is a policy I have long supported. If you look at the Department of Education, what it ends up doing is putting enormous bureaucratic strings on teachers, on schools, on education. It puts Washington in charge of what's taught to our kids. I think education ought to be a state matter, and even better, a local matter. And I'll tell you, Diane, in the last 4 years in the Biden administration, the Department of Education became an avenue for pushing radical and extreme policies, such as extreme transgender policies, were coming from Washington and being forced on schools across the country. And so I think President Trump is responding to the will of the voters in seeking to shut it down and to bring the power back to the states and back to the people.
Now, we spoke to the former Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, a little while ago on this. He says the Department of Education doesn't dictate curriculum at all. And he also said if the department is eliminated, students with disabilities would be affected because the department makes sure they have what they need to succeed, and that students in rural communities would suffer because they rely on federal funding more than urban areas do. So how would you ensure those students have their educational needs met if the DOE is dissolved?
Well, listen, I think the funding you can block grant to the states so that the dollars make it to the states without all the overhead, without all the bureaucratic weight of Washington. But, you know, it really is striking. You mentioned Secretary Cardona. You look at the last 4 years, and Joe Biden and the Democrats presided over the greatest learning loss in the history of the United States of America. Coming after COVID, Democrats across this country shut down schools, and for many schools kept them shut down for over a year. Tens of millions of school children went a year or longer without going to in-person learning. That was devastating. I was leading the fight to reopen the schools, to get the kids back in schools. We're now seeing the data, and the learning loss those children are facing is irreparable. They've fallen further behind than any generation since we recorded results. And I'll tell you, as a result of the Democrats' school shutdowns, African Americans have fallen further behind than ever before. Hispanic children have fallen further behind than ever before. So the moralizing of the previous Department of Education is a little rich, given that their policies will go down in history as utterly devastating.
Clapper.